The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. Bad news that is actually good news for society. Bad news for the NRA. The NRA has shut down NRA TV, its online television channel. They've lost their chief lobbyist, and they have a bunch of new setbacks, which are just absolutely delightful to hear about. Wayne LaPierre announced that the NRA would be no longer broadcasting any live programming. You might remember that this right-wing talk show host, Dana Loesch, was a prominent player on NRA TV. A year and a half ago or so, she and her husband both started crazily attacking me on Twitter because I criticized something that she said. At this point, Pat, I don't even remember. Do you remember what the topic was, why I got into an argument with her?
Oh, well, that's because we thought that she stole our Hatriot Mail segment idea.
Oh, that's right.
But it turned out to be a lot more complex than that.
It was more complex, but in any case, it was all in good fun. But her husband clearly not taking kindly to it. NRA's Wayne LaPierre saying cost as well as return on investment and direction of content are the reasons why they are ending NRA TV. LaPierre also blamed Ackerman McQueen, which is an advertising firm that oversees their television production, saying that there has been financial impropriety leading to a contentious legal dispute, and both sides are saying the other side did the wrong thing. And in any case, when you're both like accusing the other of stealing from you, it's hard to work together to produce good television content, apparently. So this is a win. I mean, this is an unmitigated win. It's good. I'm not, no government regulator has said you can't exist. This is not a free speech issue. It's just, I don't have to like all speech. I didn't like NRA TV, and I'm glad it's not going to be produced anymore.
Yeah, just the latest of a series of bad news for the NRA. Chris Cox, their chief lobbyist on Capitol Hill, he's also resigning. I think he was part of the plan to oust Wayne LaPierre. And once that got brought to light, I think everything kind of went crazy at the NRA. So he's leaving. That's also a good sign for their decline. I think ultimately they may just get replaced. Like maybe the Gun Owners of America, that group will become more prominent and kind of become maybe the chief group advocating for gun rights in the U.S., overtaking the NRA. And honestly, I would be fine with that because they actually seem to represent gun owners, whereas the NRA chiefly represents gun manufacturers. And that creates conflicts of interest for them.
Except that the Gun Owners of America are cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And I've interviewed Larry Pratt, I believe, is the guy who runs it, or at least used to. And they are just insanely more extreme than the NRA. Although, yes, they claim to and maybe do represent the gun owners rather than the manufacturers. It's still a disgusting, toxic group. Let me put it this way. If the GOA becomes as big as the NRA, we're in real trouble. We're in real serious trouble.
I was actually interning in Washington, D.C. when I was in college. And the group that was in charge of the program that I was in put together a gun debate featuring one of the heads of the GRA, what is it? Gun Owners Association, GOA, versus a gun control advocate, someone who had survived the Virginia Tech shooting.
Yeah.
And the GOA person, in order to kind of get on equal ground, try to take a moral high ground, he talked about how his son died in a swimming pool accident. And that was how he tried to counter the experience that the Virginia Tech shooter had gone through as a way to kind of like match the emotional appeal. And it just came across as total pandering. And I was like totally put off by the thing.
You know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of yesterday in the debate, Bill de Blasio saying, hey, I have a black son. And then Cory Booker saying, hey, wait a second, I'm actually black. And the entire thing just, again, sort of like a competition. When it comes off like a competition, it just gets really weird for me.
Yeah, and of course there's that whole layer of identity politics stuff too. Democratic candidates starting to speak Spanish, even though for the two that tried it, Beto and Cory Booker, neither one of them are native Spanish speakers. So it just kind of comes across as inauthentic. Like maybe if Julian Castro had tried it, it would have worked.
Well, I don't know if you saw at one point,
I
don't know if you did watch the whole debate, but at one point Julian Castro did actually speak just a little bit of Spanish, and like it was totally fine. It was a complete non-event because he actually speaks Spanish.
Yeah, maybe it was less like a sentence or something like that, like a very short thing.
Yeah.
It was total pandering. Also, did you notice that Elizabeth Warren used the term Latinx, which is kind of coming up as a sort of like gender neutral way to talk about Latinos?
Yes, I did notice that, and I don't know. It's like I've talked to my dad a lot about this because he writes a lot of published articles in Spanish, and he started to use that term. and then stopped using it after he talked to a lot of other Latin American philosophy types, and he is not using that term at this point in time. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have a super strong opinion about it, but I don't feel compelled to use it or say it myself. But people can
Yeah.
disagree, I suppose.
If we were starting languages from scratch, I think we would get rid of the gendered pronouns, and certainly languages that have gender, like French and Spanish, we would probably want to get rid of that too, just because it doesn't make sense that if you have a group of people, some female and some male, that the male version of the word becomes the one that you use.
Yeah, it doesn't feel egalitarian. It's merely a linguistic convention. And I understand the argument that language influences how we see society in great ways. So if we change the language, we might change society. I understand the arguments. I don't feel super strongly about it one way or the other. Hey, let's talk about drinking really cold water. This is interesting because in my family, there's a whole thing I'll talk about related to cold water. There's some research that says it's not particularly healthy to drink really cold water, like ice water. And there are particular medical conditions where this is clear. There are esophageal conditions, for example, where you're advised to stay away from really cold water. But there's also, there are a couple of different studies, one from 2012 and one from 2001, which suggest different possible negative health consequences to really cold water. For example, that drinking cold water can cause headaches in some people, which sounds to me similar to how having ice cream can potentially cause headaches in some people, but it's unclear if this is the exact same thing or not. Others say that really cold drinks can cause sore throats or cold-like symptoms, although no serious study has been able to replicate that. Then there are also studies which say that drinking really cold water is good, that it's good for exercise performance to drink really cold water. There's others who believe that if you drink really cold water, the body has to work to move to sort of find homeostasis and bring that cold water up to body temperature, and more energy is used to do that. It's similar to people who wear or do exercise with those cold ice vests where the body has to expend additional energies to keep you warmer because of that cold vest that you're wearing. Again, I don't know that too many of those assertions are actually backed by good science, but there's this massive debate, Pat, over drinking cold water versus room temperature.
Yeah, and what do you do when the results are inconclusive? I guess you just stick with what you like the most, or maybe you go with room temperature water because maybe that's the safest. Like, what do you do?
I drink cold water. I love cold water. And when I, at home, have a glass of water, I keep my Brita filter out at room temperature because I don't want it taking up space in my fridge. But I will drop a handful of ice cubes into my glass when I put the water in. I like cold water. And what's really funny is apparently very cold water is a relatively American thing, at least compared to the countries I've visited. Like in Argentina, in Europe, you're not served ice water. The idea of a big glass of ice water is basically unheard of. Water is typically brought out at room temperature in 2 little glasses at restaurants, and that's what you have. And my dad and now my stepmom both, every time we go out to eat and a waiter comes over with whatever number of glasses of ice water that correspond to the number of people at the table, as soon as they put that ice water down in front of my dad, he immediately says, excuse me, could I have one with no ice, please? And between the immediate request and the fact that he speaks English with an accent, I notice the look on the face of the waitstaff every time that they go, this is not going to be a good table. This is going to be a really annoying table. But other than asking for room temperature water, my dad is actually not super annoying out at restaurants. But now that he started asking for no ice, my stepmom every time also asks for no ice. And often I'll get uncomfortable and I'll say extra ice for me, and then say, no, I'm just kidding. Just the normal, I don't need any special requests to be met.
Oh man, when you bring water over to the table, you're barely getting started too.
Right.
So that puts you in a tough place. It makes
Definitely.
it seem like it's going to be this difficult for the entire time that you're there.
Right.
I like cold water if I'm especially parched. Like if I'm working out or something, cold water is what I like. And also there's one study, of course there's conflicting studies, that says that 16 degrees Celsius or 60 degrees Fahrenheit is the best temperature because it leads to you sweating less. And I'm all about that because I'm a naturally very sweaty person. And if I can cut back on that, I'm happy. But if I'm not like totally parched, if I'm just kind of, in the mood for a little glass of water, then I'm okay with room temperature.
I'm
That's
the
fine.
opposite. If I am super thirsty, like after running, where I want to chug a glass of water, That's the one time I don't want ice water because it does start to bother my throat. If I'm going to chug like the entire glass, I do want just like slightly cool water.
I mean, how fast are you chugging this thing? Is it all going down in one gulp, or are you just like taking a sip, waiting a second, taking another sip?
Oh, no. I'm not, when I'm thirsty, I'm not doing these single sips. I'm chugging.
Oh, man. Well, I think that tells us a lot about who you are as a person, right, and the direction that the show is going into.
Maybe so, although I never chug a beer. Water is the only thing that I would ever consider chugging. Okay, bad news for the Donald. The Donald, and that's _Donald, is the biggest pro-Trump, I would say the biggest pro-Trump enclave of the internet, although certainly it's the biggest pro-Trump subreddit at minimum. And it has been quarantined by Reddit. And quarantining is something that, if I understand it correctly, it doesn't eliminate the subreddit. The subreddit's there, the content is there. But if you go to the subreddit and you're not a subscriber, you will get a warning on your screen and it will say, are you sure you want to opt into viewing this content? Because the content is, controversial, offensive to some, disturbing, whatever. And quarantine subreddits aren't able to generate revenue. They're not able to appear in non-subscription-based feeds. They're not able to appear in search or recommendation. So it's not banned. The reason for this are calls for violence within the subreddit, I believe related to threats against police, Pat, if I recall correctly?
Yeah, and also public officials in Oregon having to do with a climate change bill that is currently being discussed. I mean, this is, I think, it could be the right move. I don't know too much about this subreddit. I don't think I've ever even gone to it.
It's toxic.
But of course, like, conservatives are going to claim that this is the latest crackdown of conservatives on social media, just like what YouTube is doing, demonetizing Steven Crowder. But like, if you want to make that argument, then you're conceding that conservatives are oftentimes homophobic, or that that conservatives, I guess in this case, are willing to threaten public officials and the police. And is that really the hill that they want to die on?
That's one question. And then, of course, there's always, as you first alluded to, censorship and speech crackdowns. I mean, listen, it's Reddit. Reddit can do whatever they want as long as they're not discriminating on the basis of protected classes. They're not banning the content. They're not telling people they can't participate. They're merely saying, we have determined that the content here is problematic enough as it relates to our terms and conditions that the content is not going to come up in search results. The content is not going to come up as a recommended subreddit, but the content's there. You can join, you can post, you can read whatever you want. And the hilarious thing about everybody from the Donald arguing that this is a suppression of speech, the Donald is known to be one of the most heavy-handed subreddits when it comes to banning people who are not 100% on board with Trump. I mean, there are so many examples of people who go there and they say, listen, I basically agree with everything that Trump is doing, but the Kellyanne Conway stuff has to stop. I mean, the woman's a disaster. She violated the Hatch Act. She's got to go. That will get you banned on the Donald. So it's very hypocritical for them to be saying that this is a crackdown on speech when they are known as one of the most ban-friendly, ban-happy subreddits on Reddit.
And we know that Trump contradicts himself all the time. So I think that you're at risk of being banned even if you agree with Trump sometimes, because then he'll come out the next week and change his mind totally. So retroactively, you should be banned in that case, I guess.
There are all sorts of wacky examples that I'm sure we could discuss in detail. But bottom line, this is completely toxic, and this hopefully will reduce the number of people that stumble onto the content.
Wasn't it true that for a time you weren't even saying the name of the subreddit? Like, you wouldn't say the Donald subreddit?
Yeah,
you were just kind of alluding to it?
Why was that? I just didn't want to give them any promotion. I mean, okay, now this is the bonus show, and it's actually a story about the subreddit, not about what is being said on it so much. So I feel like if I don't say the name of it, I'm kind of not really doing the story. But yeah, I won't, on the regular show, I won't casually mention the subreddit because it's just so toxic.
Wow, they're like Voldemort. You don't even want to say the name. Also, like radical Islamic terrorism, which we know that our former president refused to say.
Yes, why wouldn't Obama say it? It was a terrible
Scandal.
thing. When it's a huge scandal, and once he asked for the wrong kind of mustard. Okay, that does it for today. New show and new bonus show tomorrow, and then we've got the 4th of July week next week. So next week is an abbreviated schedule. It'll be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week. We'll be off on Thursday and Friday. And we're going to pack a lot in. I mean, it's still going to be a great week of shows, but it will only be 3 of the 5 days, and then we'll be back the Monday after. Talk to you tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.